Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Tes is following closely on a statement the Gemara has just said that one day Torah will be forgotten from the Jewish people. On that subject, the Gemara brings a description of the mistakes that the leaders will make, which cause the destruction of Yerushalayim and prevent its rebuilding. The Gemara will have a lengthy Agarata on the subject, and then the Gemara will relate an incident where somebody sent 3 questions to Levi, one of which pertains to canopy and the halacha of Oel, as we were discussing. Then the Gemara will have a few more halachas from others. And then we'll get to the Mishnah. The Mishnah will introduce us to, again, it'll reintroduce us to the halachas of straining and when there is a proper way to get your wine without the sediment that is within it, and the Gemara that follows. So first we begin the daf with a lengthy Agarata discussing the destruction of Yerushalayim and trouble that arrives on the world in general because of mistakes of the leaders. This is following the Gemara which we saw at the end of the last daf about the fact that a Torah is destined to be forgotten from the Jewish people, and here we see other tragedies that befall us because of the loss of scholarship amongst our scholars. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yosi ben Elisha says, if you see a generation that has a lot of trouble, go check the leaders of Klal Yisrael, because any trouble which comes to the world comes because of the leaders of Klal Yisrael that are not properly leading and are not proper scholars. How do we know? And here the Gemara quotes a series of psukim from the Navi Micha, who says, Shimu Zayis Rosh Ebeis Yakev Katsina Beis Yisrael HaMasavim Mishpat V'Skol HaYishara Ya'akeshu Boin Etzion V'Damim V'Yushalayim Ba'avla Rosheha B'Shoichad Yishpoitiv Chayanei B'Mechir Yeru Niveh B'Chesef Yikseimu Hashem Yisha'enu Leimar Haloi Hashem B'Karbenu Leisavi Aleinu Ra'ah. So what does this mean? It means that the Navi says, hear this, I ask you, the heads of the house of Yaakov and the rulers of Yisrael, those that hate justice, those that destroy equality, those that build Tzion with blood, and Yerushalayim with Averos, the heads of those people judge and they get paid for it. The Kehanim teach for money, and the Nevi'im say Nevuah in exchange for reward. Those are the 3 sins that are being described here: judging, teaching, and saying Nevuah in exchange for money. Now, the problem is that Hashem doesn't punish them directly because they have bitachon. They say, oh, we lean upon Hashem. We say Hashem is among us. No evil can become us. So what's the punishment on that? And that it says further, so there are 3 things that will happen. Tzion will be plowed like a field. Yerushalayim will become a pile of rubble. The and the Harabayas, the temple mount, will become a destroyed forest. So here you see the 3 verses of the leaders brings 3 repercussions for the world and Yerushalayim in general. Okay, so on that subject, the Gemara says that furthermore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not rest his Shechina on the Jewish people until all the evil-doing judges and leaders are removed from Yisrael. How do we see that? Because you have a series of psukim in Sefer Yeshaya, which says as follows: I will release myself of my enemies, and I will turn my hand against you, and and I will purge away all your dross, all your impurities. And I will return all your judges the way they were in the beginning, the righteous ones, and your advisors as at first. Only afterwards, we will be called the city of justice and the city of faithfulness. Then afterwards it says, Tzion will be redeemed with judgment, and it will return with charity. So the Gemara says, what does all this mean? This means to say that first you have to get rid of those evil leaders, and then we will become in a state where we can say that we can return and be restored. Ula says Yerushalayim will only be redeemed with tzedakah, with charity, like it says here in the Mishpat, like we just said. Now, We had read the Etzef Kavar Sigayech on that. Rav Papa says if we would get rid of those show-off Jews, those who flaunt whatever they have, then we would also be free of the Amgushi. The Amgushi are people who tattle and carry false tales about us to the government and cause people to hate us. And if we would also get rid of the bad judges, then we would also get rid of Gzirafti. We would get rid of those officials who whip us and abuse us using what they consider to be legal means. Now, how do you see all this? Because it says Ve'etzef kabor sigayech. That means sigayech, Rashi explains, means the haughty ones. If we get rid of them, then we could get rid of the bor. And if we could, and we have Hasir Hashem Kol Mishpatayich Pina Oivech Melech Yisrael Hashem Bekerbech Leitiroi Ra'oi. So if we would get rid of all the judges who are wrong, then Pina Oivech, then we would get rid of all our enemies. Okay, on the subject, Rabbi Malai says the name of Elazar Shimon. What does the Torah mean when it says in Yeshayahu, Shavar Shamati Rishayim Shevet Moshlim, Hashem has broken the stick of the wicked and the staff of the rulers. So Hashem has broken the stick of the wicked. That means He's gotten rid of the wicked judges who are as a stick in the hand of those who bribe them and control them and use them to abuse others. Shevet Moshlim, that refers to Talmid Chachamim, who are family members of these wicked judges and are used by them for their own nefarious purposes. Mazutra says it's actually Talmid Chachamim that are willing to cover for the judges who don't know anything by teaching them the right halacha so they can rule correctly. The problem is they don't always ask, and then they end up ruling wrong. Okay, next, Elazar ben Malai says, in the name of Rish Lakish, what does it mean when it says in the pasuk in Yeshayahu, Ki chapechem negoyalu badam v'etzboiseihem ba'avoin sifseisechem dir b'shekel l'shonchem avla tegeh. So it means as follows: Ki chapechem negoyalu badam, your hands are full of blood. That refers to judges who accept bribes. Etzboisechem ba'avoin, your fingers are with sin. Those are the scribes who write out the official rulings. Sifseisechem dir b'shekel, those are the lawyers who speak falsehood and they mislead the litigants. And l'shainchem avla tehege, and your tongues shall cause injustice. Those are the litigants who are misled or who mislead. Okay, going further, Rabbi Malai says in the name of Yitzchak Migdalah, from the day that Yosef left his brothers, he didn't taste any wine, like it says in Bereshis by Yaakov's bracha to Yosef. It says that he was a Nazir from when he left his brothers and didn't have any wine. It says they didn't drink wine either, like it says that after he finally met them and he revealed himself to them, he drank with them and they became a little intoxicated together. So that indicates that before that they didn't reach that state. So the Gemara says that's what he holds, that they didn't drink anything at all before. The other one, Rav Yitzchak Migdalah, says no, they didn't reach a state of shichros, but they did drink before they found Yosef. Okay, last thing, Rabbi Malai says, as a reward for Varacha v'samach b'libay, when Aaron came to meet Moshe returning to Mitzrayim, and Aaron was not jealous that Moshe was being given leadership before him, even though he was older and he had been working for Klal Yisrael for longer, in that the reward for that joy in his heart and lack of jealousy was that he got to wear the Choshen Mishpat upon his heart afterwards. Okay, that includes the Agadata. Now the Gemara relates an incident which includes three halachic discussions. One of them is similar to the one that we had earlier about the kila. That's a canopy that's spread over a bed, and the Gemara understands that that's a problem of OL. And we had said earlier that there's a potential way of doing it in a permitted fashion. Rami Bar Yecheskel said that you can leave it folded up on one pole of the canopy with a pull cord tied to it, and then you'd be allowed to stretch it by means of that cord, even on Shabbos. You wouldn't have to be concerned about all then. So the Gemara says as follows: the people from the city of B'Sheichar sent to Levi, and they asked 3 questions. First of all, can you spread a canopy on Shabbos? Is there any permitted way? Second of all, if you have kishusa, which is like hops, which grow amongst thorns, are you allowed to plant them in a vineyard? Is it considered a vegetable that's forbidden to be amongst grapes, or is it not? And the last question was, if somebody has passed away on Yom Tov, what are you allowed to do with the body? Are you allowed to bury it? Is there a permitted way to bury it on Yom Tov? Obviously, it's forbidden to bury things on Yom Tov, but these are extenuating circumstances because the body will spoil and become putrid. So the Gemara says that they sent a messenger with these 3 questions to Levi, but by the time he arrived, Levi had already passed away, and so he was no longer able to answer the question. So Shmuel said to Rav Menashe, if you know the answers to them, if you're wise, then you should send the answers to them. So he sent them the following thing. He said, the canopy, we went all around in all things. There's no permitted way to stretch a canopy over the beds on Shabbos. So the Gemara asked, well, why didn't he send Rami Bar Yecheskel's idea with the pole cord? So the answer is because the people that were asking were not B'nai Torah, they're not learned in halacha, and therefore they would be lenient more than one should, and he didn't want to tell them they're allowed to do that. Now, what did he say about the hops? Are you allowed to plant them in the vineyard? So he said, no, it's kelayim. So the Gemara asks, well, why didn't he tell them that it is permitted? Because we know that there's a machlokas between Rabbi Tarfon and the Chachamim in a brisa as to whether or not you're allowed to plant hops in a vineyard in Eretz Yisrael. And kelayim is a mitzvah which is d'oraisa in Eretz Yisrael, outside Eretz Yisrael, and Chutz La'aretz, which is where this town was. It's not a d'oraisa. And the rule is that we always go with the lenient opinion outside Eretz Yisrael. So why don't we rely on Rav Tarfon's lenient opinion that you're allowed to plant it? So the Gemara answers again, because they're not B'nai Torah and they'll be lenient more than they should be. Now on the subject of planting kishusa in a vineyard, the Gemara has a few other opinions here. The Gemara says that Rav Hai used to call out and say anybody wants to plant kishusa, hops, in a vineyard is allowed to, you don't have to worry about it. Rav Amram Chasida used to hit somebody who would do that, he would give him a malchus. Rav Meshashia, what he would do was that he gave a pruta, he gave a coin to a child who was a goy, and he had him plant for him. Why did he do that? He held that it was really permitted, but he didn't want to do it himself because he wanted to do it in a different way. He didn't want it to become acceptable, so he hired a guy who was a child to do it. The Gemara says specifically a guy was a child, not an adult guy, because then you may get confused and assume that a Jew could also do it, and not a child who was a Jew, so that he shouldn't get into the habit of planting these things and do it when he grows up. Okay, now the Gemara says, what about the mace? What about the person who died on Yom Tov? So his response to them was, you should get a guy to bury him, not a Jew. And it doesn't matter if it's the first day of Yom Tov or it's Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golius, which is only Yom Tov Midrabanan in outside Eretz Yisrael, still you should get a guy to do it. So the Gemara asks, is that really true? Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shilas says in the name of Rav Asi that there was an incident that happened in the shul in a place called Ma'on, which is again in Chutz La'aretz, and it was on Yom Tov, which was connected to Shabbos. So we don't know if it was Yom Tov was on a Friday or if Yom Tov was on a Sunday, but either way, the person had died and they allowed him to be buried. Rav Yochanan gave a psak that said that the Goyim are allowed to bury him. That fits with what we said, but Rashi over here says we don't know whether the person had died on Yom Tov, which was the day before Shabbos, and therefore they permitted him to be buried on Yom Tov, because otherwise he would have to wait until after Shabbos, which is an extra day. Or if Yom Tov had fallen on Sunday and he died on Shabbos, and by the time we came to Yom Tov, it was already the second day, and therefore we allowed him to be buried then, even though it was Yom Tov, because otherwise he would have to wait to the third day, which would be Monday. But either way, our problem is that Rava says is that somebody who dies on Yom Tov Rishon, the first day of Yom Tov, then you should get a guy to bury him. But if he dies on the second day of Yom Tov, which is Yom Sheni Shel Golius, you can have a Jew bury him. And even if it's not Yom Sheni Shel Golius, even if it's the second day of Rosh Hashanah, which is really Yom Tov, so that is not like the psak which we saw over here. Now, Rava also says if it's an egg that's born on Yom Tov, then there is a difference between Rosh Hashanah, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and the second day of other Yomim Tovim. There we are stricter. We say that it's Mukta on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. But either way, our problem is that we see that Rava says that you're allowed to have a Jew bury somebody who was born on the bury somebody who died on the second day of Yom Tov. So how come Rav Mishashia sent them that you're not allowed to have a Jew bury him even on the second day of Yom Tov. And the Gemara again answers that they were not b'nei Torah, and therefore they would end up being lenient more than you're supposed to. Okay, the Gemara now starts a discussion. This will be another halacha about the canopy over the bed, and again one about the strainer, which we saw is spread between sticks, that you're not allowed to spread it out on Yom Tov. So the Gemara will give a trick as to how one might be able to do that, and that'll lead us into a discussion of a number of other potential halachic tricks and whether or not they are permitted. So first of all, the Gemara says, Rav Avin Bar Huna said in Rav Chavan Bar Giura, a person is allowed to wear the canopy in the street, meaning he wraps it around himself like a talus and he wears it, even though the straps that are used to connect it to the poles of the bed are hanging from it. Now, ordinarily, those straps would have no function, and therefore you would say that he's carrying them on Shabbos, because it has no value as a clothing item if it's being worn. But yet, it's not carrying, that's what he says. So the Gemara says, how could you say that? We know that the halacha is that if you have a talis with tzitzis on it that is not properly halachically affixed, then those tzitzis are considered carrying. So that should be just like the straps of the canopy that are hanging. So Gemara answers it's different. The tzitzis are very choshev. They're very important, and therefore you cannot say that they're just batel to the talis. They're insignificant and not considered to be anything when they're hanging onto a talis. However, the straps on the canopy, those are insignificant, and therefore you don't have to worry about them. Okay, now referring to the strainer, again we had seen that a cloth which is spread over a barrel and you put sediment into it to strain the wine out from among the sediment. We said that you're not allowed to spread that on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says that there is a trick that you can't do that, and that's if you use it to store pomegranates. You're going to spread the strainer there so that you could keep your reminim on there, your pomegranate. So the Gemara says that you're allowed to do, but even though it's a trick, since it's only an issur d'Rabbanan, you're allowed to do it. However, you have to be careful that those pomegranates are there first at the beginning. So it should be obvious that you're doing it for the pomegranates and not to use it as a strainer. So the Gemara says, why do you have to do that? I'll show you a case where you're allowed to do a trick, and you don't have to put something on it to make it obvious. What's the case? The halacha is you're not allowed to put hops into liquid in order to make beer on Yom Tov, unless you need it for Yom Tov itself. You don't have any other beer, whether it's talking about beer made from barley or from the dates or whatever it is. However, you are allowed to play the following trick, and that is if you have beer, you're allowed to still spread it out and do it to make beer, even though you already have beer, and then you'll use the new beer and not the old beer. Now here, we don't say that you have to do something to show that you are allowed to. You're just allowed to make the new beer. So Gemara says that's different. That's because when somebody sees it, he's going to assume that you don't have beer. It's not a problem. It's not visibly obvious that you're doing something forbidden. However, this strainer, it appears that you're going to strain it. Unless you put those pomegranates in there, somebody who sees it assumes that you're spreading the cloth for straining. And if you're actually straining and you don't have the pomegranates there, then he will get the wrong impression, which is actually really the right impression. Okay, next on the list over here is that the Rabbanan said to Rav Ashi, did you see this young Talmud Chacham? And it's either Rav Huna bar Chiyun or it's Rav Huna bar Chalavan, but either way he did a bunch of tricks. He wanted to plug up a hole in a barrel, so he stuck a clove of garlic in there and he said, oh, I'm just storing my clove there. That's an issur d'Rabbanan to plug up the hole. And he needed to cross the river to watch his crops, and so he went to sleep in the bottom of the ferry, so that when the guy went across, he woke up on the other side, and he just said, oh, I just needed a place to sleep. And so you see that he had all these tricks that he played. So the Gemara says, how are you allowed to do that? The Gemara says, he's a really Suri d'Rabbanan, and he's a Tzurva Mirabbanan, he's a Talmud Chacham, therefore you don't have to be concerned he's going to end up doing it without the trick involved, and therefore he's allowed to do it. The Rabbanan allowed tricks as long as it's only an issur d'Rabbanan and it's not going to escalate into an actual direct issur without the trick. Okay, now we get to the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses the following permitted manners of straining. It says you're allowed to pour water on a wine sediment which is already sitting in the strainer. The water will allow more wine to drip through the sediment and through the strainer. You're allowed to strain wine through handkerchiefs or through woven reed baskets. you're allowed to put a raw egg into mustard seed, which is sitting in a sifter. If you do that, then what happens is the yolk drips through the strainer and it adds nice color to the mustard, and the white of the egg stays above, so that's separated. You're allowed to make a mixture called anumalin on Shabbos. That's a mixture of wine, honey, and pepper. Rashi defines it as really any type of mixture. And on that, Rabbi Huda says that you need a shinoi, so on Shabbos you're only allowed to mix it in a cup, and Yom Tov you can mix it in a jug, and on Chol Hamoed you're even allowed to mix it straight in the barrel. And Rabbi Tzadok says it depends how many guests you have, you're allowed to mix the amount that you need for the guests. Okay, the Gemara now expounds on the halachas of straining here, how you can manage to get your wine clear without having pieces of sediment flowing into it. So first of all, the Gemara says if the wine is pretty much clear, or if you have clear water, you're allowed to run it through a strainer on Shabbos because you're not actually holding anything back. But if you have wine that's well mixed with sediment and it's in there, then you're actually straining it out, and that is a problem. So the Gemara says, but why do you say that? But we have a brisa where Shimon ben Gamliel says that you are allowed to mix up your barrels and pour them through a strainer. So you see, even though you have sediment in it, it's not a problem. So the Gemara says that that is different because it's referring to where all the barrels of wine are all filled with sediment and you really have no choice, so you would drink it with the sediment in it anyways. You don't really care. Therefore, what you're straining out is not significant. And if you don't care about what you're straining, you wouldn't mind drinking it without straining it, so then the straining itself is not considered to be a significant action, and it's not a problem. Okay, now, the Mishnah said that you can strain through a handkerchief. The Gemara said just as long as you don't stuff the handkerchief in the mouth of the kli and strain through that, because it may end up squeezing, it'll get soaked, and then you'll end up squeezing things out of it. She also says it might be uvda dechol. As far as straining into the basket, so the Gemara says you have to be careful for oil here, because if you're going to pour through the basket, and the basket is more than a tefach above the bowl that you're pouring into, underneath it, then you're creating an oil. Obviously, you're going to set it up to stay there. So you have to make sure that the floor of the basket is less than a tefach above the kli that's catching the wine. Rav Hai said if you're stretching a cloth to cover the barrel of wine, got to be careful for oil also. You can only stretch over part of the barrel, not the whole barrel. Rav Papa said you should not stick a wad of fibers in the mouth of the jug that you use to draw the wine from the barrel, because when you pour the wine out of the jug, it's going to strain, and that's classic straining. But his trick was that in his household he used to have two jugs that they used to draw the wine. He would pour from jug to jug, slowly and carefully, and leave the sediment behind through the pouring. The Gemara asks, what about the nitzitzais? What about some of the particles that are clearly be strained? The Gemara says Rav Papa didn't care about that. He was a beer maker, and therefore that wasn't significant to him, and it was not a halachic issue.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.